Wednesday nights, the O'Fallon Hoots won a baseball game. I'm not sure. That's a real fan right there. I'm not sure if it's because the national anthem was sung so beautifully, or if the other team was just intimidated by the way I threw that first pitch out, all right? I'm just saying. I threw that as hard as, I did not throw it as hard as I could. My one goal, my one thing that I did not want to do was to step off that mound as I was throwing it and fall and hit the ground, and then to have to call a medic out and get me out there, all right? Like that was my goal, and I succeeded in that, all right? I threw that pitch, and it went straight across the plate. Doesn't matter how many times it bounced before it got there. It went straight across the plate, all right? Like that was the purpose, and so it got me thinking of back when I was in college. I played some co-ed softball, and softball is underhand pitch. They wouldn't never let me play pitcher. I didn't understand why. They put me on the outfield, all right? Now, if you know anything about softball or baseball, if you play in the outfield, that should tell you everything you need to know about my skills in playing baseball, all right? That was the one position they could put me where I did not cause much damage to the team, all right? So they put me in outfield, but we had a pitcher who would throw a perfect pitch every single time, and this was co-ed softball, and she did a great job. The problem was she was such a good pitcher, she was a bad pitcher, because every single time she would throw it in the exact same place, right down the center of the plate. And the opposing team's like, I know where the ball's coming. I know where to hit the ball. It's easy to hit. It's teed right up there. And so she was a perfect pitcher. I tried to convince them, hey, if you let me pitch, they won't know where the ball's going, all right? They will have some fear in their eyes because that ball may hit them, all right? Like, you just don't know. And so to throw a perfect pitch every single time was not always a great thing. And so it got me thinking about baseball and perfection. Baseball is a sport of statistics and perfection. And because it's what I do, it's the way my mind works, is I started thinking, well, what if Jesus played baseball? Now, I know baseball wasn't around back then. But what if Jesus played baseball? Would Jesus have batted 1,000? Would he have hit a home run every single time? Would Jesus have ever pitched and struck out every single person? 27 up, 27 down, perfect game. See, I don't think he would, because this is going to sound controversial, but listen, Jesus was not perfect. Jesus was not without mistakes. As a baby, babies learn to walk slowly, correct? Like, you've never seen a baby just get up and start walking. See, Jesus was a baby at one time. I can argue that Jesus probably did not just get up and start walking, didn't move from diapers to no diapers all of a sudden. There was a process. There were probably some accidents that happened along the way. When he was a toddler, when he was a child, he probably stubbed his toe. He probably fell and scraped his knee. As an adult, as a son of a carpenter, and his earthly father and Joseph, as a son of a carpenter, when he was building things, there may have been some times where Jesus was swinging a hammer and he did not hit that nail squarely on the head. He may even hit his thumb sometimes. See, Jesus made mistakes. Jesus was not perfect, but what Jesus was that is different from you and from me is that Jesus was sinless. And there is a difference between perfection and being sinless. And when we start putting those two things together, which I personally have a tendency to do, to think, oh man, well, Jesus was sinless, he was perfect. Well, if Jesus played baseball, he probably would have struck out sometimes. If Jesus was pitching, he probably would have thrown a ball sometimes. If Jesus was running, he probably fell down and scraped his knee at some point in his life. Those are okay things because those do not have to do with his sin condition. And so it is okay, and we should not conflate the two. We should not put the two together, that Jesus was not perfect, but Jesus was sinless. When we start to mix those two things together, what we do is we start to remove the seriousness of sin. Because we have to think, oh, he was just a human. He had these attributes. He did these things. So he must have tripped. He must have did those things. But those were reality. Those were imperfections. They were not sin. It's not a sin to fall down. It's not a sin to scrape your knee. It's not a sin to swing a hammer and miss the nail and hit your thumb. Now, the words that come out afterwards, different story, but it's not a sin to miss. But it is a sin when we begin to take away the credit from who God is and what he deserves. And so we must take sin seriously and understand that perfection is not a part of that. See, when Jesus came and stepped on this earth, he laid aside a part of who he was as God. See, God is perfect as the Father. I will stand by that. I'm good with that. God is perfect as Father, but Jesus had to lay aside some of those attributes so that he could take on flesh, so that he could be born into human flesh. And Jesus was God, and Jesus, as God, was omnipresent, which means he was in all places at all times. But Jesus took on flesh. As a baby, a human with flesh, with a skin, it is impossible to be at all places at all times. Jesus willingly lay aside a part of who he was as God so that he could come to us as human. Part of that was his perfection. He did not lay aside his sinlessness, though. And that's where we have to get today, is because we have to understand when we look at Jesus, he may have fallen, he may have scraped his knee, but he was without sin. And without sin, he is the perfect sacrifice and atonement for us. And as we read this passage today, as we were walking through the Sermon on the Mount, we want to be very careful, we want to be very clear that the sin we are dealing with is very serious. And there are serious consequences when we sin. Not when we make a mistake, not when we fall or scrape our knee, but when we disobey a perfect and holy God. And so that's what Jesus is presenting today. He has been talking with the Pharisees, he has been with his disciples, the Pharisees are listening. And a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the fact that Jesus said, in verse 20, he said, if you want to surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees, if you want to get to heaven, you must surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees. You must do better than they are doing. And then he goes and says, by the way, this is what their righteousness looks like. And he talks about anger and murder. And you heard last week from Griffin as he talked about the idea that if you are angry with your brother, that's the same as having murder in your heart. There's the same intentions there. Intentions are what matter. And see, Jesus didn't just say, well, he didn't go for the easy ones. He didn't go like, well, gossip and lying and maybe just cheating, because he knew, like, when it comes to the big ones, if the Pharisees were going to say they had anything good, it would have been easy for them to be like, hey, I've never killed anybody and I've never committed adultery. Those are the big ones, like, I'm good with that. Like, yes, I may have cheated a little bit one time, or I may have told a little white lie sometimes. They may have owned that, they may have said that, they may have admitted it, maybe not. But there was no way that they were going to say, or any of the religious leaders of the day were going to say, I killed somebody. There was no way they were going to say, well, I've committed adultery. And so Jesus says, look, here are the two big ones, and here's what it means for you. And so in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30, we have the continuation after he is talking about anger and murder. After what he has said to them, this is what he continues to say, where our righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees. In verse 27, it says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose your own members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. That's a pretty straightforward, serious claim right there that Jesus is making. He said that you have heard it said, you have heard that we do not commit adultery. Adultery, simply defined, means sex with someone outside the confines of marriage. Adultery can happen when a husband cheats on a spouse. Adultery can happen when someone who is unmarried has sexual relations with someone that is not their spouse because they don't have a spouse. So you do not have to be married to commit adultery. But adultery is a very serious thing. All through the Old Testament, we see over and over again the idea of adultery and how it's presented. God, when he talks about the Israelites, he uses language that says, hey, you are committing adultery when you chase after false idols. When you chase these false gods, they lead you away from me. And that is adultery to me as your God. And so it's a very serious thing, but Jesus doesn't stop at just saying, well, this is adultery. As long as you don't commit this act, you're okay. He goes on to define it by saying a clear understanding. He says part of our sin nature is to blur the lines. Part of our sin nature is to say, well, as long as I don't do this, then it's okay. And he says, let me tell you, when you look with lustful intent, when you look with the bad intentions, when you have just that thing in you that says, I'm just looking with something that changes my heart, then that is something that is committing adultery. He equates the two. He doesn't put them separate. See, our culture today wants to blur the lines as much as possible. They want to say, well, as long as you don't do this act, then you're okay. And the sad thing is, culture has said that There are some pastors sometimes who are saying this now. There is a well-known pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention, used to be a pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention, who is suing the SBC as a convention because he is saying we have defamed his name because in a report we said he committed adultery. And he is defending himself, and this past week or past 2 weeks, the report came out where he has defended himself and said, well, I did not actually do the act. I may have did some things, and it defines the things he did, but he is defending himself of not committing adultery. I'm just reading Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 through 30. No, you had lustful intents. There were hands where hands should not been. There were lips where lips should not have been. You have committed adultery. We have to be very clear on this because sin is serious. And culturally, our culture would run away from that if they could. And so I want to give you some statistics because I think this is what it looks like for us and how the culture is attacking is that it is attacking us in ways that we sometimes are aware and sometimes we are not so aware. So sin culturally is serious culturally because it is everywhere around us. These are some statistics that I just want to share with you because I think that this lustful look is something that's, whether we want to admit it in church or not, is around us more than we would like to say. Pornography is at an all-time high use in our culture. A 2021 study, so this is a few years old, but it's the latest they had, from within the United States, not even worldwide, just within the United States, it said that 85% of 14 to 18-year-old men or boys and 57% of 14 to 18-year-old girls have viewed pornography. 85% of boys, 14 to 18, almost 60% of girls, 14 to 18. That means if everyone in this room today were 14 to 18 years old, and you had not seen pornography before, that means the person on your left and the person on your right had both seen pornography. More than 2/3. A study of the year before, 2020, they said they viewed men and women. They did a study that found that 92% of men and 60% of women had consumed pornography in the last month they surveyed them. Over 90% of men. That's 9 out of 10. Now, they didn't do separate from church people and unchurched people, but they did a survey that was willing to come forward and say, are you willing to admit that you're viewing pornography? So there's 9 out of 10 that were willing to admit they had viewed pornography in the past month for men. Over 60% of women. There's one website, and I won't give you the name because I'm not trying to send you there, but there's one website that gave us statistics. The last that it had was from 2019, or the statistics I found from 2019. It said it had 42 billion, with a B, billion visitors that year. There are 8 billion people in the world. It had 42 billion visitors. That's 115 million visitors a day. That means during the time while we are in church for this hour, there would be 5 million people visiting that only porn website. And that was from 5 years ago. And I can almost guarantee you those numbers have only increased in that time. The pornography industry, to try to figure out how much money they actually make, there's one stat that somebody shared from back in the early 2000s that said that the pornography industry makes more money than the Major League Baseball, NBA, and NFL combined. The problem is we don't actually know how much money the pornography industry makes. Estimates are somewhere between 6 billion and 97 billion. That's a big gap. But that amount of money is being poured and used to create content that is damaging to Christians, that is causing Christians to sin. And the problem we can't define it is because we don't know exactly what is pornography anymore. Back in the 60s, there was a Supreme Court justice who said, when asked about the understanding of what is pornography, he said, it's hard to define, but I know it when I see it. It's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. What is included in that number? It's not just pornography websites, I would argue. I believe it's movies that promote that lifestyle. 50 Shades, the book series, graphic novels, social media that promotes those things. That is an industry that is being promoted by that. One of my websites that I use for statistics, and I love the name of it because it paints such a great picture of that. It's called fightthenewdrug.org. And it is a website, is an organization that is fighting the new drug being pornography. They know that there is addiction, they know there is problems that all go along with that, and this organization is very adamant that they are a non-Christian organization. They want to share statistics and information and promote non-pornography without using the Bible as their basis. Now, I almost guarantee if you were to find these people, have them in one-on-one conversation, I bet most of them are probably Christians. But they are doing it outside of the Bible. They are using statistics. They are using studies. They are using the way the brain works to fight against pornography. And if the world is doing that, how much more should we? See, Jesus said, look, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery. I tell you that if you look with lustful intent. See, pornography is just the tip of the iceberg. But it's not a tip of the iceberg because it is pervasive. It is all around us. The reason I want to talk about this today, or the reason I have to talk about this today, is because I guarantee you there are people in this church who are struggling with pornography addiction. Those statistics do not separate themselves in the church just because you walked in here with your nice clothes on today. The reality is we all struggle with some form of lust. Now, it may be lust of the eyes, but it may be lust for power, or it may be lust for money. Jesus is specifically here talking about lust that leads to adultery. We struggle with trying to get something that is not meant for us. See, Jesus talks about murder, and then he moves on to adultery very simply because they both have the exact same problem. They take people, and they use people who commit murder or commit adultery, use people for the purpose of using those people as objects. They don't treat people as image bearers of God. When someone is able to kill another person, you are killing an image bearer of God. Whatever form that may take, a person is a person. They are an image bearer of God. When you commit adultery, you are cheating on another image bearer of God. You are taking away from the image that God has put in that person, and you are treating them as an object. You are treating them for your entertainment or for your joy. When you consume those things, that you are treating people as objects. And so we must be very careful as we walk through these passages to say, all right, are we treating people as people, or do we treat people as objects? And we can do that in other forms too. When we look at the people who work around us, and we see them as, well, that's just a stepping stone. They're in my way. I need to get to the next, I need to get over that person to get to my next raise. When we drive and we look at the car in front of us as not another image bearer of God, of just an obstacle in our way to get where we're trying to go. I had the privilege of being able to do a funeral this past week. One thing is when you get to do a funeral and you move from the funeral home to the graveside, you get in your procession and you drive from one place to the other. Everybody's got their flashers on. They got the police escorts. Now, I don't know, this is my first funeral where we actually got to drive from the funeral home to the progression site in Missouri. So if this is different here in Missouri, let me know, because I grew up in the South. And in the South, most of the time, when a funeral comes by, people pull over to the side of the road. That was not the case on Friday. There were people flying past us. They were flying through the red lights. They were not going to be slowed down. See, when we have the ability to look at people who are hurting and think, well, they're just in my way as objects, then we are treating them as objects, not as image bearers of God. And so we must be careful how we treat people. Do we view them as objects, or do you view people as image bearers of God? See, culturally, it is a serious thing for us to pay attention to. And it's only gotten worse. It's only become easier. You may be thinking, well, I grew up in the 60s or the 50s or the 40s. Pornography wasn't that big of a deal. I don't understand why kids today just can't turn that off. It was in 1953 that one magazine, Again, I won't share the name because it's not important, but one magazine began their publication of pornography. To get to that magazine, you had to go to the store, and you had to go to a cashier and face them eye to eye and say, I am buying this pornography. Like there was a level of shame that came along with that. In the 80s, the VCR was invented. Well, now we can rent those type of tapes, and we can watch those types of things, but you still had to go out and buy the video and face somebody, or at least make contact with somebody to come into that. In the 90s, though, the internet came along. The internet came and it introduced that we can now have some privacy when we sin. We don't have to have open shame. And if you don't think pornography was a big part of the internet, go back and look at some of the things that drove internet speed. The reason we have the internet speeds we do is because pornography was pushing and driving and getting those speeds to where they are today. Because it had to have more and more and more. The amount of videos that are uploaded pornography-wise on the internet today is more than any single person could watch in their entire lifetime. It's insane the amount that is out there. But then we didn't stop there. Then we created smartphones. And now do you not just have access privately, but now you have access with you all the time. 24/7, you can access this sin-inducing material. See, it's become easier. It's become more prevalent. It's gotten where it's just there all the time, and it's harder and harder to fight. Yes, you may have not struggled with pornography back in the 50s, but that's because it wasn't in your face all the time. If you open social media today, it is going to be in your face. And the way that social media works is if you happen to just slow down as you're scrolling, if you let your finger slip off of something too quickly, it's going to show you more of that same content. And it's going to keep putting more and more out there. There's one social media platform itself that just recently, in the past month or two, came out and said, you know what, we're not going to restrict anybody's right. They can share whatever they want. I.e., they can put pornography straight into their platform now. It is coming for us. If we are not aware culturally that it is attacking us, then we will be caught off guard. And we should not be caught off guard. Culturally, it is coming to attack us, and we need to pay attention to that. But it also not as serious culturally. It is also serious because of its consequences. There are serious consequences that come along with this understanding. John Owen, a church father, said, we should be killing sin, or sin will be killing you. See, there are consequences that come. If we are not aware of the sin as it attacks us, then we will let it attack us. And it will defeat us because it is coming over and over and over. It is coming so fast that we must pay attention to it. This was well before the internet, well before there was pornography, but there was one church father by the name of Origen who dealt with the struggle of lust. See, it's not just a pornography issue. It was back in 185 AD. He said, you know what, I'm struggling with this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take all my clothes off, and every time I deal with lust, I'm going to roll around in a briar patch. That's pretty extreme. It didn't work. So that led him to another, I'd say, trial method, but the next thing he did was he castrated himself. A few years after he did that, he came back and regretted his decision and realized that that was not the cause of the problem either. He misunderstood the meaning of this text where he was reading it, where it says to cut off that which caused you to sin. Do not walk out of here today and cut anything off when you get home, all right? That is not the meaning of this text. But what we should understand that it is serious. There are consequences when we deal with it. We are not to play with sin. We are not to dabble in sin. We are called to run away from sin. When you think of sin as something to avoid, I like to think of it as a line. Now, if you could imagine the front of the stage is a line right here, the best way for me to deal with sin, the front of the stage, is not for me to say, well, you know, it's not technically bad for me to be up this close. The question I should not be asking is, well, how close can I get without falling over? Because if I keep going, and I keep going, Lord help me, I'm going to fall. I keep playing and playing. At some point, if I stood here all service long, I'm going to trip. I'm going to fall. I'm going to tumble. And guess what's going to happen? I'm going to cross that line of sin. But I don't want, the best way for me to deal with sin is not to see how close I can get to it without actually touching it. The best way for me to deal with sin is to turn and go this way and stand back here. Now, if you want me to be safe, not fall off the stage, I can sit back here the entire sermon. There is no way I am falling off the stage. The camera guys back there are like, perfect, you're not moving, I don't have to follow you, that's great, awesome. But there is no way I'm going to fall off that stage when I'm moving away from that line. I am safe right here. But the problem is our human nature is, we don't say, where's the line? I need to run away from that. As a human, as our nature, what we do is, the question we always ask is, well, how close can I get without actually falling over? What can I look at online, on my television? What can I read that's not technically a sin, but it can just be close enough? And we like to dabble in sin. The problem is that's not what we're called to do. A great picture in the Old Testament is when Joseph is a servant in Potiphar's household, and his wife comes to him and says, all right, Joseph, I want you. And Joseph says, nope, you're my master's wife. He has trusted me. I am not going to do that. And she takes hold of his clothes, grabs his undergarments, and what Joseph does is he says, nah, I'm not going to get caught in this, and he just starts running. He runs out of the house. She doesn't let go of the clothes. He goes streaking. He goes without his clothes. He runs away without his clothes on, but he is running away. He's not dabbling to say, how close can I get? Well, I'm not technically doing anything wrong. She's coming on to me. Like, he's not playing with the line. He's running away from it. When we deal with sin, we must treat sin the exact same way. We must recognize that we are not to see how close we can get. We're to see how far away from it we can get. That's what God calls us to. Living in Florida for a couple of years, I had the opportunity to see people who would go and take their family pictures at the beach. And I can almost guarantee you it would play out the exact same way for every single family that had kids. They would get there all in their nice, dressed up clothes, khakis and all wearing white shirts, had to be the exact same picture. They would get there and the kids would be like, ooh, the beach, the ocean, let's go play in the water. And mom and dad would be like, nope, do not. See that line where the water is getting up there? Do not step into that wet sand. Do not get near that wet sand. And that would last for about 5 minutes. And then, next thing you look up, the kids would be a little bit closer. And they knew where the line was, but now they're just getting their toes a little wet. 5 minutes later, their knees are wet. 10 minutes into the picture session, their shorts are wet. Before they leave the beach, the kids are soaking wet. Because all they did was say, oh, how much closer can I get to that line without really getting wet when they'll be okay? When we treat sin that way, we are going to stumble. We are going to fall in. We're going to make mistakes because we're going to trip. The best way not to trip and make a mistake into sin is to run away from it. And so that's what Joseph does. That's what we are called to do. Sin's consequences are serious. When we stumble, when we fall, when we sin, Jesus says the consequences of sin is hell. We deserve hell when we sin. We have offended a perfect and holy God, and so we must be aware of that. That if we're going to play with sin, the consequences that we deserve is hell. But because Jesus knew that, because God knew that and foresaw that, he understands the seriousness of sin, the consequences that would come, but he also understands for us, Christologically, how important Jesus is for us. That if we are to try to do it on our own, big if here, if you are going to get into heaven on your own, if you're going to be good enough, then this passage perspective is, yes, cut off your hands. Cut off your feet, gouge out your eyes, cut off your ears. If your nose can make you sin, cut it off. If this passage means without Christ, then those are the things we should do. We should cut them off. But Jesus is teaching by the presupposition here, the law was never given so that it would get us into heaven by being good enough to follow it. The law was given to show us that we needed somebody else to do it for us, to show us that we could never be good enough on our own. The law teaches us that we always fall short. Our righteousness does not and will not surpass that of the Pharisees. On our own, we cannot do it. But there is someone who did. There is someone who lived a sinless life. There is someone who died a perfect sacrifice in our place, not because he deserved it, but for us in our place. And his name is Jesus. See, Jesus was teaching on this because he was helping them to understand that it is not about just doing this, following this, but we need to make sure that we trust in him. The perfect sacrifice, the perfect law keeper. The one that is going to save us is Jesus and Jesus alone. And so Jesus comes into our life. Jesus is the saving grace that we need. We cannot be good enough on our own. Our righteousness will never surpass that of the Pharisees. But because our righteousness will never surpass that, we need someone who will. And Jesus came and lived a sinless life. He lived without sin, and then he died as a sacrifice for our sins to give us eternity that we could not gain on our own. And so we, because of Jesus, can have that eternity. When we get that eternity, what we have to be careful is we must protect ourselves. And so we need to have some guardrails in place that will help us so that we do not get to the place where it's dangerous, a place where we fall off the edge. This past week or a couple weeks ago, we were visiting Florida, get to visit friends, and we took one day and we went to Disney World. Of all the rides you could ride, Zoe's favorite ride, I think, she may tell a different ride, Zoe's favorite ride is to drive the cars at the raceway. Now, there are a few things you need to know before I show you this video clip. At no point am I giving Zoe keys to my car, I think, ever. I'm not trusting her to move it from the garage to the driveway, let alone on the road where people are. But what you see here is a child, because there are guardrails in place, that has complete joy in her life. And if I gave her the keys to my car, I hope not, that her expression of joy would be as great as much as this, because there are guardrails to keep her safe. Take a look at this video and see some of the joy that she has in her face. Eyes on the road. Not in the camera. Stop hitting the middle bars. If you've ever been on the raceway there, you know there's a big metal bar right in between that car. And if you've ever ridden it with a child, you probably know where that bar is because you felt it as you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and hits the guardrail every single time. There's a reason that they can place 20,000 kids or whatever it takes to go through that raceway on a single day on there, because if there were no guardrails in place, that ride would be shut down after 2 seconds. They would not make it out of the starting block because they would be running into each other, running all over the place. There are guardrails there for their benefit. When we place guardrails in our life, it keeps us safe for our benefit. When we recognize that God gives us guardrails, it is a good thing for us. We may not always understand it. We may not always understand the consequences if we're not careful with them, but there are guardrails that are there for our good. And so when we have guardrails, God gives us 3 different guardrails, I think we see in this passage, that are meant to help to protect us, because God wants to protect us. God does not want us to see how close we can get to the line without falling over. God does not want us to face the consequences of hell. He wants us to turn to Jesus, trust in him as our Savior, and then when we do that, make sure that we continue to run away from sin. Continue to put sin to death in our flesh and trust in him. The first area that we must trust God in to protect is our heart, to protect our intentions. And we should put things in place that matter to us so we would protect our intentions. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." The book of Ezekiel talks over and over again about God expressing his desire to give his people new hearts, hearts that are turned to him. And so we must pay attention to that. We have to recognize our intentions matter. If we guard our heart well, it is a good thing for us. We should pay attention to that. Protect your heart. Verse 27, "You have heard it said you should not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." See, what Jesus is trying to protect here, he's not trying to protect our actions. He is first and foremost trying to protect our heart. And so when we put our faith and our trust in Jesus, he gives us a new heart. But that doesn't mean our heart can't still falter. Our heart can't still chase other loves. And so we must be careful to guard our heart well, to put protections and guardrails in place for that. We guard our heart by also protecting our head, more specifically protecting our eyes. Verse 29, "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better to use one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell." We are called to protect our eyes, to guard what we watch. I love the book of Job where Job is talking and he makes this statement in Job 31. He says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. I have made a promise that I will not look at these things. See, looks is not a casual glance, but a constant stare with the purpose of lusting, the purpose of looking for bad reasons. We have to be careful what we watch. That means we need to limit what we watch and what we read. That comes to be with television. It comes to be with social media. That we have to be careful what we watch and what we allow to be watched in our homes. I've served in enough churches, I think I can tell this now, and nobody can figure it out, but that's fine, you can do. I remember visiting Deacon Chairman one time. It's not our Deacon Chairman, it did not happen here. I went and visited Deacon Chairman at his home, was visiting him, just seeing how he's doing, talking with him, and came in, his grandson, 11-year-old grandson was there over watching TV, and they had the TV on in the background, they're talking, and happened to look up as they were watching TV. And what I saw on TV was not something that I would show my 11-year-old. There were things that I would not put in front of, there were things that I would define as pornography on the television that they were watching in a movie screen, as a movie. And they didn't see a problem with that. Like if we are not careful to guard our hearts, to guard our eyes, then we let those things slip in where even the chairman of the deacons can be like, oh, that's not a big deal. See, our culture puts that in movies all the time. We must guard our hearts to say, I cannot watch those things. When it comes to social media, those social media rabbit holes, you watch one video and then you watch another and you watch another, and it just shows you more and more of the same stuff over and over again. And one second you're looking at butterflies, the next thing you're looking at girls with butterfly tattoos, the next thing there's just girls, and it's not okay. Like we must guard our eyes and be careful the patterns that we go down, where we allow our hearts and our eyes to take us. We have to limit that, and that means we also limit what we allow our hands to do. Verse 30, and if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it's better that you lose one of your members than that of the whole body go into hell. See, we need to set up some physical barriers that will handicap ourselves. We need some physical things that will stop us from falling into sin. That means if this line is a sin right here, then we need to put a plant and a speaker and then put a podium right here and put some chairs right. We need to put up as many barriers as we can to keep us from falling or getting close to that line. Now, for the world, we may have to do some things that just look extreme without cutting off our hand or gouging out our eyes. But there are some things, if I told you, hey, why don't you try this? The world would look at that and be like, why don't you just go ahead and cut your hand off? Maybe it means you don't have a computer in a room that is not public to everybody else. Maybe it means you don't have a time where there's internet in your house after a certain hour. Maybe it means you get rid of your smartphone. I mean, everybody has to have a smartphone nowadays. Does it make life easier? Absolutely. We're headed to camp tomorrow for kids camp. I'm gonna wait till 9 o'clock. I'm gonna pull a map out on my phone, and it's gonna give me real-time directions. That's a lot easier than when I started in student ministry, where I would go to MapQuest and print out a map and have like 2 or 3 different directions in case we ran into traffic, where I don't have to print off every single one of those maps. It's easier, but maybe culturally, I need to say, yeah, it's easier, but I don't need that in my life. Maybe it means as a parent, you say, hey, I'm not going to give a cell phone or a smartphone to my kid. I'm not going to allow them to have some of the apps that are out there. Because I'm going to be honest, worked in student ministry long enough, if you give a kid a smartphone and you limit certain things, there's ways around it. You should put those barriers in place. Put as many things, any filters, any protections you can in place. But the issue is not the student's hands. It's not our hands. The issue is the heart. And when the heart wants to seek after something that's not right, it will find a way around those barriers. But we should put barriers in place to help protect us. We should make sure that even though it may seem extreme, we are willing to do what it takes to follow after Jesus as he calls us. See, when we sin, whether that's lust or murder or adultery or gossiping or lying, when we sin, ultimately what we are doing is we think we are heading towards happiness. That's why we choose to sin, because we think it will lead us to happiness. If you are sinning and you do not think it leads to happiness, I don't know what you're doing to sin, but you're not doing it right. Sinning correctly will make us think we're heading into happiness. That's the reason we choose to do it. You know sin leads to death, sin leads to hell, but we still do it anyway. So there must be some form inside of you where it says, this is going to make me happy. Jesus says, though, when we sin, we are headed to hell. We must pay attention to the direction we're headed. Are we chasing just our happiness for this moment? Or are we sending ourselves to hell? What direction are you headed in? What are you chasing after? Are you putting barriers in place to keep you from running straight into hell? Ultimately, the only way we get to heaven is through Jesus Christ. And if you do not have a personal relationship with him, I will tell you that today is the day of salvation. Today, it is simple enough for you to say, I need Jesus in my life. I know I'm a sinner. I know that my sin is always going to be there until I get to be to heaven. But I want to repent of my sin, and I want to turn to Jesus. I want to run away from my sin and turn to him. And when you begin that relationship, I believe, Jesus, you are who you say you are. You've done what you said you've done. You've risen from the grave. You have conquered death. You have defeated sin in the grave. He makes it possible for us to have that relationship. And he calls us to confess that, to share that, to make that public. And so I would encourage you, if you've never done that, that would be the first step today to defeat sin, is to turn to Jesus. If you have turned to Jesus, recognize you may fall, you may trip over the barrier, but continuing to turn back to him. Put more barriers in place. Turn back to him. Trust in him, because he is a good, good God. And he loves us, and he gives us opportunities over and over again to be made right because of what Jesus has done. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Dear Father, we thank you for loving us. We thank you for today. Father, I know this is not always easy to talk about, not always easy to understand. But Lord, this is serious. Our sin is serious. Our sin is meant to separate us from you. But because of Jesus, we can be made whole. Because of Jesus, we can be made right. Father, I pray today that there is anyone in here who is being separated from you because of their sin. And they've never confessed that, and they've never made that public. They want to follow after you. Lord, today would be the day of salvation. It would be the opportunity for them to come and say, I need that relationship. I can't do it on my own. I need that. Father, for those who have made that decision, who have trusted in you, Father, I pray that today, that you would help us to realize that when we stumble, when we fall, when we trip over that line, we would also see that there is grace and forgiveness. There is opportunity to be made whole. We can come back to you because of the love you have for us in Jesus Christ. Father, I pray that you would help us to walk in that. That this week, as we walk with you, that our guardrails will be put up so that we can have the joy that you desire for us. Father, as we worship you this morning, I pray that you will guide us and give us wisdom. Help us to guard our hearts, to guard our heads, and to guard our hands, so that we can faithfully follow after you. Father, we love you and we thank you. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. I want to invite you to stand and worship and respond as God has placed on your heart today.